On today's show, we will wrestle with three big questions about Andrew Brunette. And we are not the only ones asking.
You're Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Predators podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day. We are, of course, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to kick off today's episode with a hearty shout out to our Locked On Predators insiders and our everydayers who tune in to talk Nashville Predators hockey with us. I'm Ann Kimmel. I'm a writer and co-host with Penalty Box Radio, and friends, I have a partner in crime.
You do. I'm Emma Lingan, and I'm an NHL reporter and host with the Hockey News.
So this week, Emma and I are working our way through a series called 3 Questions About, where we ask and answer to the very best of our ability 3 big questions about key people in this franchise. Today, we, like very many others across the NHL landscape, have questions about Predators head coach Andrew Brunette. Today, we are going to talk about what we think he is best at behind the bench, what we hope he has learned in his first 2 seasons with the Nashville Predators, and what needs to be different early on if he hopes to continue his tenure in Nashville. Oh, Emma, here's a podcast that's bound to not ruffle any feathers or cause any gastrointestinal reflux among this fan base. Oh, friends. Yeah.
Oh, universally beloved head coach.
Unquestionable loyalty. Andrew
Yes.
Brunette. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of questions about Andrew Brunette, friends, have come up over the past 2 seasons. And it's not just Predators fans that are asking. It's not just Predators fans that are observing. These are questions that are coming from pundits across the league. And they're questions about the head coach, who I would say is on the warmest of seats when it comes to next season. We're going to kick it off with a positive, and I know that may also ruffle some feathers, but we're going to compliment sandwich our way through this discussion about Andrew Brunette. And that means, you kind of say something nice, you slip in some hard truths, and then maybe you try to say something nice at the end. We'll see if that's actually how this all pans out this episode, Emma. But we are going to start kind of looking at the positives. And the question that I think that everybody is asking, and we may have a little bit of insight into this just because we're around the team so much, but what would you say Andrew Brunette is best at when it comes to being a head coach?
Well, trying not to sway my opinion too much with recency bias here, because I know a lot of us, and understandably, rightfully so, probably look at this last season and think nothing, but I think that's a little harsh.
Yeah.
I think that he, one thing that he's, for better or for worse with the roster that he's got right now, he's very forward thinking as a coach and where this NHL, like where the NHL is going, where the game is going. He's very, is all about speed and, speed with the puck and without the puck, play without the puck. And if you don't have the puck, get it. And we talk about this system all the time. And it's like, it's not anything, complicated or difficult to understand. It's just like, it's hard to adjust to if you haven't done it before. And so that's what I think that, a lot of people look at him and being like, well, he's the wrong coach for this roster. Maybe so. And we will get to that. But I think that we will be getting to that. But I think that, the conviction and the belief in his system and the way that he can drag people into the fight. I mean, we saw him do it with the team, not this last season, but the season before. And, when all of us were kind of doubting, I don't know, man, I see what he's trying to do, but I just don't know if they can do it. And they did it. I mean, it may have been lightning in a bottle. I think this year will go a long way in determining that. But I just, I always think it's good when you can get a new a younger, fresher voice that's not one of the same, 8 guys that gets cycled behind the benches in this league over and over. So I do think that that's a strength.
Yeah, I kind of along the same lines. I really do feel like this is somebody who thinks the game at a high level. I think he's extremely curious about learning more. He talks a lot about he watches a ton of other sports to glean things for hockey. What does this mean when they do it in soccer, and how can that translate into hockey? What does this leadership style look like in another sport, and how does that lend itself to hockey? So I think that he is very smart. I think we knew when Barry Trotz introduced him, he said, he's known for being offensive. He's known for special teams. I think he's very creative. I agree with you. I think he has a very good understanding of where the league is going. And so I think he thinks this game and plans this game at a high level. I will say he's very inventive. But I also think sometimes your greatest strength can be the thing that trips you up at times. And I think maybe some of that, we could try something else, might have been something that tripped he and the team up at times. But I do think it is one of his strengths. I also, like you said, I am a huge proponent of, grow coaches in this league. This league has to be a place where young coaches can grow and learn. And that is not particularly fun for a fan base. I don't think Andrew Brunette would be under the scrutiny that he is under had Barry Trotz not signed Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault, Brady Shea, and expectations changed. I think everybody would have been like, hey, he's growing along with this youth movement that he is shepherding along. And so I feel strongly when it comes to the NHL that we do not need to keep recycling the same 3 crypt keepers around the league over and over and over again. And that there needs to be opportunities for new voices, new perspectives, new attitudes and cultures across the league as well. We talk about like he's innovative, he's, creative in his coaching, he's intelligent in his coaching. So if those things are true, why is he on the hot seat? Does that mean that he's a bad coach? This is a question that I think trips people up as well, because you can be a good coach and deserve to get fired. You can be a good coach and end up fired. Not every coach of an unsuccessful team is a bad coach. You look at last season, Jim Montgomery, Boston, lost his job, went to St. Louis. St. Louis was like the hottest freaking team in the second half of the season. Now, is that, what do you take? Jim Montgomery was a bad coach because Boston, things were very underperforming in Boston. But then he goes to St. Louis and they overperform. So you have to be careful not to blanket statement, Andrew Brunette, because of last season, is a bad coach. He might not be the right coach. He might be a bad coach, but I don't know that we know. I don't know that we know yet. And I think there's a lot of fans that just bristle at the thought that we might be saying Andrew Brunette is an okay coach. Like, how dare we? How dare we, Emma?
Well, it's funny because 2 seasons ago, everyone wanted to throw the man a parade for that 18-game point streak. And now we want him tarred and feathered on, outside of 501 Broadway. But I think, again, and I know we're going to get to this, I think that he does not deserve all of the blame for that. Am I saying that he deserves no blame for how last year went? Absolutely not. So listen to what I am saying, people. I am not saying that. What I am saying is that there is more blame to go around, and we will get to that right after this.
Today's episode is brought to you by our great friends at Game Time. We have all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to finally go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you have been dying to see. Live music should be all about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with killer last minute deals. Do you ever wonder what your view is actually going to look like at the venue? This app shows you a panoramic seat view before you buy, so there are no surprises. And with Game Time, the price you see is the price you pay, no hidden fees. So take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, Emma. Now we're going to get to question 2. And I think this is a question that fans maybe need to ask themselves as well. What do we need to see? What improvement do we need to see from Andrew Brunette after 2 seasons here in Nashville? What do we need to see be better about Andrew Brunette's coaching?
Well, I think the first thing, the most obvious thing is, we talked about what a big issue chemistry was on this team last season. And of course, that does not all fall on Andrew Brunette. But the part of that is under his control is, first of all, let's stop with the line blender, please. Let's give it more than a shift. Give it more, maybe give it more than a period or a game even, just to see. Stop being so reactionary, because I think that it conveys an air of panic. And I'm not saying that he is panicked, but it conveys that. So that's one thing I think that'll help with the chemistry as well. I also think, and again, this is kind of just my own observation and it could be totally off, so just take it with a grain of salt. But, all the things that we heard about Andrew Brunette when he was first hired was he's a player's coach. He's really good with communicating with players. He's like he really, can relate to them on a lot of levels. And I think that was like, oh, okay, great, cool. But then sometimes I do worry, and we talked about that leadership paralysis with this team last year, that because he was such a player's coach. Now, I don't mean to imply that he's just broing out with the guys, throwing back beers every Friday night, but I'm just saying that I know one thing about from when I worked for the team, that he is very big on like the locker room is the player space. That's their space. Like he doesn't go into the locker room after games. Like that's for them. And I'm not saying that one thing needs to change or that one thing will make or break a season, but I'm just saying that when you have this sort of leadership paralysis that we started to see with the team last year, that's where you kind of need someone to step in and be like, I'm the captain now. And, like and again, I don't mean that we have gone through this so much. We don't need to rehash it all, but like, that is not Roman Yossi's leadership style, and that's okay. It doesn't need to be. But unfortunately, when there is a vacuum and there needs to be one singular voice that needs to take over and rally everyone together, unfortunately, it kind of creates a vacuum for like a Jonathan Marchessault, or prior to him, a Matt Duchene. Not saying that those guys are bad people or bad leaders. It's just maybe the loudest voice in the room is not always the one that needs to be followed. But when you're in a situation like this, you kind of need someone that's going to step in and take control. And I don't know that that's something that Andrew Brunette would have been comfortable doing. I think that And I'm not saying he has to rule with an iron fist from day one. I'm just saying that if you start to notice the team slipping and you start to notice this leadership paralysis is still a thing, that you have to be able to respond and be able
Yes.
to be like, okay, I'm coming in, I'm taking control, hand me the keys kind of thing, because someone has to get them back on track. And again, even once he does that, not saying he's got to be that way for the rest of the season, but you need to have sort of a centering moment and someone that's going to bring you back. And I think that he might need to, be a little more firm with his hand in some of those moments.
The thing that I think of that I'm like, I want to see him improve really is what you're talking about, or a parallel track. Talking about communicating an identity. And, this was one of the positives when we talk about the first season. Like, eventually he dragged everybody into getting it. Now, it didn't stick, but he dragged everybody into getting it. And I think communicating identity, responsibility, and accountability is big. When Barry Trotz introduced Bruno, I went back and looked at the comments that Barry Trotz made when he announced Andrew Brunette was replacing John Hines and introduced Bruno to us. He talked about, this is a guy who gives a team an identity. He gives a team an identity. I will tell you that we did not know what to expect on the ice for 82 games last season. We had no idea what was going to take place. We didn't know what the team was going to perform like. We didn't know how the team was going to react in certain situations. If we did, it was probably not in the good way. So I think that there was some sort of miss on communicating that identity. And like you said, kind of rallying the troops. And it's so interesting to me because you look back at his time in Florida, where he was also a Jack Adams nominee. And I can see where Barry Trotz would watch that unfold and go, okay, here is a guy who can galvanize a locker room and create an identity and lead them. And I get where that is what Barry Trotz and other people took away from that time, the 2021-22 season with Andrew Brunette in Florida. It does have me asking now, though, like, is that the Andrew Brunette? Is that the real Andrew Brunette? Or was it that the locker room galvanized around a situation and maybe not a coach? I don't know. Like, you could see an identity at the end of the first season. We had no identity really at all last season. And here's the thing I will say, for me, it's not about the wins and losses. It is one thing to play to an identity and lose. Like, I can live with that. It is the fact that last season for 82 games, we had no idea who this team really was, and they were unable to win games. Now part of that is circumstantial. Not all of that, again, falls on Andrew Brunette. We had injured players and players who felt frustrated and would try to sort of take over and, but I think there's also then that level of accountability. And that's something Trotz talked about. Like, you got to hold veterans as accountable as you hold the young players. And I think that's something that, I hope that he has learned over these last two seasons, is how to navigate that, how to navigate accountability, responsibility, identity with a very different looking locker room than he was handed when he was handed the keys to this kingdom, friends. Coming up, we're going to talk about that. What is different for Andrew Brunette, and what has to be different right away if he hopes to stay here in Nashville? We do have a third official question, but we need to lean into something, Emma. And you and I talked about this off screen, and you've mentioned it already in this episode. Andrew Brunette was hired to do one job. He was hired to coach an NHL team, but that team was going to look a certain way. And he did that with relative, quote unquote, success. I think we would all say, hey, we were pleasantly surprised by his first season. The team he coached in his second season was a total pivot from the job description. Now, he's an NHL head coach, and you've got to coach what you've got in your locker room because you're not in charge of that. But it is a very different job description.
Yeah, I think, even going back to what you said earlier about, him being touted as a guy who can give a group an identity. Well, in his first season, he was kind of handed the ball of clay and set and told, mold this into your identity. Like whatever you want it to be, do that. But then you go out and you bring in Stamkos, Marchessault, and it's like, no, here's the we've already molded the clay for you. Now you have to go coach it. And it's like, again, I'm with you. I'm not making excuses for the guy. He is an NHL head coach, and part of that is being able to adapt, and I understand that. And I think that that's why, thinking back to like how a lot of people, myself included, were advocating for him to be fired at one point. I think, there's a lot of frustration behind Barry Trotz saying, well, we're going to stick with him. We're going to give him some time. And I'm like, you know what? Part of me wonders if that's not Barry Trotz realizing the part that he played in
Yeah,
making this season what it was
what it
for
was.
Andrew Brunette. It is such a point that, I'm glad we're leaning into here, is like the job that he got in year 2 was so different than what was on the job description that he signed up for.
I went back and was looking, I glanced at, so I didn't study, but I glanced at the roster that he coached in Florida the year that he was nominated for the Jack Adams, and it was a relatively young roster. The veterans that came in that were a little bit older were several of them were added in the season. They were brought in midway through the season. He was coaching a relatively young team. And
Same in New Jersey as well when he was the
yes,
associate head coach. Same thing.
yes. So I think you have to remember that the thing that appealed to Barry Trotz about Andrew Brunette was a specific situation. Now, that's not to say that he wasn't successful in Florida. These veterans came and it all fell apart. The other thing I will say is the veterans who were added to Nashville, and I'm not trying to be critical, I am making an observation. 2 of the 3 of them didn't want to be here. And not that they didn't want to be here, they wanted to be where they were. And so now Andrew Brunette is coaching grizzled veterans. He's coaching one veteran who has never been in another home locker room in his entire professional career. And he ain't a therapist, y'all. Like 2 of those players were coming here, I don't want to say under duress because they chose to come to Nashville. And, I'm not saying that they were like, great, we have to go there, but they wanted to be where they were.
Right.
And so they came with some baggage, whether you like that or not. They came with some baggage. So not only is Andrew Brunette now coaching a team that looks very different, he is coaching a team that looks very different with some players who have to work through some stuff. On and off the ice. So, and again, I was one of those people. Emma, did I not text you at the end of one of the games towards the end of the season, losing my hockey Jesus? Like, I can't watch him coach another game. Like, we're not saying that Andrew Brunette does not deserve criticism, that Andrew Brunette should not be on the hot seat, that the expectations of an NHL coach are you win, like you get what you get, you don't throw a fit, and you win. But also, with the other hand, you have to say, this is not the gig he signed up for.
Right.
Like, this is not the gig you hired him for necessarily.
And you know what? I think too, with like we spent last week talking about, this next core, this young, like this next prospect pipeline that's going to be coming up here in the next few years. That is really who Andrew Brunette was hired to coach, I think.
Yes.
But you can't just like put him on ice and just wait until like those young players get up to the NHL and be like, okay, Andrew, now we are ready for you. It's like you have to get him in the door when you can get him in the door and like start building that culture, start building that system there. And, again, like you said, please listen to what we are saying before you start whining at us in the comments or on social media. No one is saying that Andrew Brunette deserves zero blame or zero criticism for anything that happened last year. We are just, like you said, with one hand, you acknowledge it was very bad, and he has a lot of and he has a lot of things to work on.
Yep.
And he should be on the hot seat. Let me just say that he should be. But with the other hand, you do have to acknowledge that he was dealt a completely different hand than the one that he signed up for.
The most important, most immediate change he has to do is like galvanize an identity. Like we need to get it from training camp on what the expectation is for this team, how they are going to play night in and night out. I don't care who is in the lineup, and I don't care how old they are. I don't care what their last hockey jersey looked like, because you are wasting young players' time if you do not nail down an identity and a culture right now. Do you think Andrew Brunette is going to be able to rally? Is he going to surprise us in the good way?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know how many more bad surprises we can take here, but I think
It is
that
like being on Fear Factor. We're tired of
is.
eating bugs.
Yeah. I think that Andrew Brunette, first of all, going back to semantics for a second, because what I said and what you said were very different, and I think it's worth pointing out. You said he is on the hot seat. I said he should be on the hot seat. I, for one, don't think he is. I really don't think he is, to the degree that a lot of people think that he is.
Yeah. I think that the perception, I think the view is that he is on the hot seat. I think that people look at this situation and go, that's a coach that's going to be fighting for his job in October, November. I think that is an understandable view, but you made this point several weeks ago. I don't know that Barry Trotz thinks the same way that the public does and that
That's
NHL
what I'm
pundits
saying.
do. There's the hitch. That's the difference.
When it comes to being on the hot seat, like actually being on the hot seat, there's only one guy whose opinion matters, and that's Barry Trotz. And I think that he is going to let Andrew Brunette see this through, even if they start 0-10.
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
listen, I'm just putting it out there. Maybe some kind of reverse jinx or something. I don't know. But I don't think that a bad start to the season is going to lose Andrew Brunette his job. I just don't. And I'm not saying that that's good or that's right or that's how it should be. I am just stating facts here for all of the reasons that we just laid out. I don't think a bad start to the year is going to lose him his job right away. I don't think it's going to happen that way. But I do think that, be that as it may, now Barry Trotz is going to have to answer for a lot more. And he's going to have to explain why and give us a believable reason why that Andrew Brunette has not lost his job.
I think Barry Trotz is very comfortable being in that position because he was the head coach in the other position. And I think this is where a former head coach in the GM chair maybe views things a little bit differently than a general manager who has never been a head coach. And I'm not saying there's one path to being a successful general manager or one path where you absolutely are going to suck at it. But I'm telling you, I think Emma is right. I think Barry Trotz is going to go, you know what? Put the heat on me over this. And let's take some of the pressure off Andrew Brunette and let's see what Andrew Brunette can do, because Barry Trotz has been the Andrew Brunette. I think it's very, very interesting. I think things would look a little bit different, maybe with a different general manager. I don't think you're wrong. I think that the small amount of hope that still exists and the belief in Andrew Brunette that may be there in the fan base saying, hey, let's wait and see what he does. I think if they go 0-10, Emma and I are going to have liver issues. I don't know how we're through 10 games. But B, I think that's going to evaporate very quickly.
Yeah.
But I also know that the only person who's going to make that decision is Barry Trotz, former head coach in the NHL. Something to keep in mind. Very interesting season ahead for Andrew Brunette. Very interesting season ahead for the Nashville Predators. Emma and I will be there to cover it all. The good, the bad, the oh sweet, what the flag nog. We don't know what to expect. This is a sure season coming up, friends, and we're going to be here to cover it all in depth. Coming up on Friday's show, we're going to talk about 3 big questions for Steven Stamkos, a big key to the Nashville Predators moving forward. We're going to talk about what he needs to answer and how things need to look for Steven Stamkos moving forward for this franchise. Before we log off today, though, Emma, will you let everyone know where they can find you and your work?
Yes, you can find me on social media at Emma_Lingan, and you can find my work at the Hockey News.
You can find me on social media at AnnK_Mama on Ice. You can find my work with Penalty Box Radio as well. You can find the podcast on social media at LO_Predators as well. That will do it for today's episode, a spicy episode on Andrew Brunette. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. What do you need to see from Andrew Brunette right out of the gate? And how long you think he's going to stick around? We should start a pool. We're not going to do that. That would be illegal. We are going to be back on Friday to discuss 3 big questions about Steven Stamkos. We'll see you then.